Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Just last night we were discussing how MSNBC got Joy Reid a special gift for Black History Month, the gift of free time. Emphasis on the free part because they're not paying her a penny for it. Well, the reason they did it was because they're trying to get in good with the Orange Man. Not to mention revenues are down. Turns out most of their so-called primetime talent had to take a pay cut, including Rachel Maddow. And recent news has made it clear that Trump is serious about bringing the white media to heel, so everyone's trying to get in line as early as possible. The Associated Press, however, apparently didn't get the memo. They're upset that Trump has banned them from White House events because they refuse to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, which is the name that he wants to have used. And as a result, we've had a few people, not a lot, but a few people in the white media who have been saying this is the beginning of the takeover of the media. This is just like Viktor Orban's Hungary. It's like Nazi Germany. Trump's going to take over the media. Not really, but they want people to feel threatened by Trump deciding that he's going to be yanking the AP out of one or two White House events. Apparently, we're supposed to all start quaking on our boots and say, this is the beginning of the end of the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment has just been killed because the Associated Press didn't get their engraved invitation to one or two White House events. So let me ask you something. Now, is this the same Associated Press whom, after the murder of Trayvon Martin, they were trying to find out whether or not he had some sort of juvenile record? They were calling themselves filing suit and making legal moves to try to find out, was there any dirt under this kid's fingernails, anything that we could use to justify the murder of a child? Is this the same Associated Press that Donald Trump doesn't want in his White House? By the way, it was after the Associated Press pulled that stunt that I started calling them the Aryan propagandists. The same AP who couldn't wait to repeat and push any asinine rhetorical defense they could for killers like George Zimmerman and Daniel Pantaleo. Is this the same Associated Press that I'm supposed to be feeling all sorry and sympathetic for? I'm supposed to be scared of what happens to them? They were furious when they saw police finally being arrested and held to account. The AP is the main global news service, quote unquote, that so much of the white media relies on for their propaganda. I've pointed out to you repeatedly that if you look at a number of so-called news stories that you read either on aggregator sites like Yahoo or your own local newspapers or TV station websites, you'll notice that a lot of those stories, if not a majority of them, have an AP byline. Practically all the white media outlets license the right to copy and paste AP stories on their own websites. That's how the AP makes their money. And why are these white media outlets so scared of not being invited to some event or another? It's because they see themselves as being in a private club. That's why the so-called White House Correspondents' Dinner is so important to them. They see themselves as basically celebrities and myth-makers, modern-day sorcerers who can conjure magic from thin air and make people believe their illusions. That's why they hate and resent that black people did what we did when we pushed back hard. As the white media sees it, they're the ones who decide what's real and what's not, and if they ignore you, well, you don't exist. Well, what happened was the black grassroots flipped the script on that one. We choose not to believe them, and they don't exist. That's a fact, and black people made it clear we don't believe them. As the white media, their job is to protect white power. They're the mouthpiece for it. So when they were openly justifying and viciously defending the murders of black people, their goal was to outlast us, to get us to throw up our hands and accept it. Only we didn't. We proved that the white media's magic was ultimately impotent and that they didn't have anywhere near as much power of persuasion as they thought they did. Oh yeah, they tried to dig in their heels, make a last stand backing all of these racist DAs, many of them Democrats, and yet the black masses trampled them all. The police weren't the only ones who took a huge L, the white media did too. When the white right was violating laws and inventing racial extremist measures masquerading as law, like the Stop Woke Act and others, the Democrats didn't say boo. The white media reported on all of these blatant anti-black measures as if they were totally normal. They were trying to normalize it because the white left doesn't look at us any differently than the white right. So they let the white right become emboldened and continue all this open illegality because it was against black people, and that made it okay. Someone needed to push back against all these unruly black people. Because you had the white leftist media, including MSNBC, calling people like us the fringe. What's fringe about demanding that everybody be held to the same standard of law? The white media couldn't wait to platform anyone who would attack us, like nigga Jim Clyburn talking about stop sloganizing, stop sloganizing. And as far as they were concerned, what they were doing was a victimless crime because black people can't be victims, especially not of the white media. But now the orange man and his goons are pointing their guns, or rather legislative pens, at the white media and its institutions and trappings, and now all. Now, all of a sudden, all of this right-wing performative extremism is a big problem. Suddenly, it matters when someone tells you that you must repeat their lies or they'll use their political office to attack you. The time to head this off was when it was happening to black people, but the left corner of the white media and the Democrats didn't mind because they wanted black people to be attacked. We were making demands that threatened their white privilege of the left as much as it did the right because they both depend on the same white privilege, so they wanted someone to show that they were declaring war on us. As far as they were concerned, they were going to find a way to beat black people into submission. Instead of treating the threat as the open war on the law that it was, they did everything they could to normalize it, to report on it as if it was just a small local story and not that big of a deal. And now their chickens have come home to roost. What's happening to them is considered to be no big deal. They're reaping what they sowed. They spent years allowing these racist operatives like Chris Rufo and Ed Blum to push unconstitutional rulings and laws and ridiculous illegal measures. They allowed the white right to front-load the courts with Federalist Society flunkies, judicial activists who would pretend that all this unconstitutional message legislation was somehow legal, and they would simply legislate from the bench. They let that happen. And finally, having allowed the white right to take over so much of the political and judicial arenas, they now have to contend with them on these grounds. And apparently they think, or desperately hope, that other white media outlets are going to come to their rescue and speak up for them. Maybe, I don't know, protest by refusing to cover the White House. Is that what they thought was going to happen? The AP figured that would occur? Well, that's not going to happen. Same way that whenever some employee at one of these white media companies would get fired, like, say, Joy Reid, nobody ever leaves in protest. That never happens, and it won't happen. All of these people are out for themselves. Other white media outlets, they're not going to make a stink about this because there's no honor among sleaze. So I don't have any sympathy for the AP or any of these other racist propaganda mills, and neither should you. No matter what the MSNBCs or CNNs may try to tell you, what's happening to the AP or any of these other white media outlets is not some great threat to the First Amendment, because in these people's hands, the so-called free press is just another tool of anti-black racism. Look at how the AP used their free press. They used it to attack black people and to try to justify the murder of a black child. They don't use their huge financial resources to investigate these race soldiers. They use their money, all of their contacts, and their enormous media reach to attack us. We're the ones that they come after. And then, since so much of the white media copies and pastes what the wire services like AP and Reuters put out there, they are responsible for much of the anti-black slants and narratives that we have to contend with daily. It originates largely with them. So make no mistake, the reason the Democrats/white left are so upset isn't because they've seen the error of their ways. They're upset because they're being attacked by the same dogs that they thought would only be attacking us. And even while they're protesting Trump slapping them around a little bit, they simply want him to call the dogs off. They don't want the dogs to get put down. This is about getting you and me to come to their aid. And soon as we do, they'll immediately revert back to cheerleading for these exact same racists who are attacking them now. Well, the answer is no. They were digging our graves, and now their would-be buddies are trying to put them in it. Had they gone to war when the Ed Blums were pushing their nuisance suits, had they done what they were supposed to do and start front-loading the courts with judges who would rule based on the law and not geriatric clowns like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and their college buddies who were politically reliable, then they wouldn't be in this mess right now. But then again, all these leftists are pals with the white right, in many cases even married to them. So they don't see a problem, until now. This is them replaying the 2020 playbook, and I need you to hear it because they've seen people, black people in specific, abandoning the usual be scared narrative. Sure, there's a threat, but it's not new. They had no problem with it when it was us catching the business end of all of these attacks from the white right, and now they'll have to do what they should have done from the beginning. Dismantle these anti-black operations that they allowed to proliferate and operate and spread. They don't want to do that. That's what they're trying to avoid. All of this screaming and yelling you see them doing, that's meant to get you to panic and to do what black people did in 2020. Be scared. They're not sure of what, but just be scared. And then what's going to happen? Well, you need to vote for the Democrats. And what will we get? Nothing. All the same issues that I told you about are still extant. Democrats have not and will not propose to address any of our concerns or interests. They haven't changed their tune. Look at what it is that Hakeem Jeffries is doing. Well, this is like a game of baseball. And in baseball, you don't swing at every pitch. That's what Hakeem Jeffries is saying. He's sitting here doing asinine sports comparisons and saying we're not going to swing at every ball. Meanwhile, you got the Steve Bannons and the Stephen Millers who are saying we're going to be hitting these guys every freaking day. We're going to hit them multiple times a day. They're not sitting here going, well, we're not going to be swinging at every ball. They're like, no, we're going to be swinging at every ball. We're going to be swinging at anybody who sneezes. We're going to be swinging at everybody in the stands. That's the difference. So you got one group who's on a total war footing and the other guy's saying, well, we're going to try to pick and choose when we fight. What does that tell you? Remember, what little was done in the 1960s wasn't done by eager Democrats who couldn't wait to do what was right. That's one of the lies that the left corner of the white media tells. The reality was the exact opposite. The civil rights movement didn't begin with conscientious Democrats. It began with black people who had been making demands since the days of FDR and were always being told by these Democrats what they couldn't do. Robert Kennedy was allowing J. Edgar Hoover to spy on the civil rights movement, and President Kennedy didn't pass one bit of civil rights legislation. It was only with the mounting political pressure put on Democrats since the end of World War II up until the Johnson administration and the various black leaders who arose during that period that things finally came to a head. But even afterwards, Democrats were tripping over themselves to repeat the same lie that the white right had been saying since 1865. Haven't we done enough for these people? Remember, when Joe Biden first got into politics back in the late 1960s, he was mentored by Southern segregationists, and he was proud of that, and still remains proud of it to this day. There's a reason why the Northern Democrats had no problem with all of those racist Southern Republicans, because they all had one thing in common. They were in lockstep and solidarity against black people. In reality, nothing had been done, nothing had changed. Democrats know what they have to do. But as I've always told you, the white right serves an important purpose under white supremacy. They advance the most reactionary aims of the dominant society, and they allow the alleged opposition party to come up to us and say, you have to vote for us. Those people over there, those mean old bigots, they're just too dangerous to allow into office. But you can't make any demands of us. It's too dangerous for that. Just do as we say. And don't put any pressure on us once we're in office either, because that's too dangerous too. Just trust us to do our best. And they've been repeating that lie over and over and over for the last 60 years at least. Well, does anyone see any progress from them yet? Even now, they know exactly what they're supposed to do in order to get back in the good graces of black voters, but they don't want to do it. The last time that we saw progress on policy was in 2020, and that was because black people took to the streets and declared that they would handle things themselves. While black people were in the streets fighting for change and producing justice, there was not, and to this day, there is not a single Democrat who's been doing anything about qualified immunity or declaring that the police must be punished for their crimes. They didn't do that. The examples that you have of police finally being held accountable, that came from the people, not from the Democrats. When Joe Biden was campaigning in 2020, he said that he was going to divert COVID funds to the police, and when he became president, that's exactly what he did. Meanwhile, he was telling black people, well, that White House-level Police Accountability Commission, I don't have time for it. Oh, there's supposed to be a George Floyd Policing Act. I ain't got time for that either. Well, we were supposed to be having some sort of legislation about the police. I tried, but what can I do? Democrats did not and still have not passed any laws at the national or even state levels regarding qualified immunity, and they're not going to. What changes there have been were because of black citizen revolts. So understand that, family. This is the Democrats' game that they're playing. The game of lie and deny. And the current game is to scare you into obedience. Is the threat real? Yes, there is a real threat, but it's not new. That's the point that the black media has been trying to make to you. We've been on the receiving end of the white right's legislative attacks for decades now. Everything that the Democrats tell you to be scared is going to happen to the white media and all of these white institutions, we've been suffering all of those attacks and nobody's been bothered at all. When New Bern, Alabama was forced to have corrupt white leaders and illegally and unconstitutionally kept these people in office, Democrats never even mentioned it, not even once. This has been going on since at least the 60s, but the Democrats decided out of sight, out of mind. And you know who else didn't want to talk about it? The white media. The only reason that anybody was talking about New Bern, Alabama was because the black people out there started making noise. Now, how the hell is it you got all of these so-called liberal reporters, as we're told, and these people, they never want to set the standard of, you know how you get yourself a Pulitzer? You do it by making sure you report on all this racist stuff against black people. As far as they're concerned, that's what they're trying not to do. No matter how much kvetching and hysterics they're going into about Donald Trump slapping around the AP, the reality happens to be these white supremacists always eventually make nice with each other. No matter how much they may seem as if they're at each other's throats at the moment, and this isn't even them at each other's throats. This is just them having one of their little tiny tiffs with each other. But they want black folks to think that there's something substantive about it. No, there's not. These guys will go ahead and have their little squabble, and then before you know it, they'll be making nice with each other as they do one of their little backroom deals, and then they'll all be united against us. One big united anti-black front. That's how it always works out. So you really want to be sympathetic for that? You really want to support them for that? Because you know that's how this is going to turn out, because it always does. So let's make sure we understand that. These people here, they could go out of business tomorrow, and that's okay because they're not sticking up for black people, and they don't want to. As they see it, black people are the enemy. Trump, he's merely throwing a temper tantrum, and they don't like it, but they're not about to decide that this guy is the enemy first. We're the enemy. He's just a momentary inconvenience. I want you to think about that the next time you got some leftist blowhard who's talking about fascists seizing office, about fascists who are going to ignore the courts and just stay in office regardless of the elections. Well, as black people, we've endured that for decades, through both Republican and Democrat administrations. I'd like to know where any of this outrage about democracy being toppled was then, when it was black people who were watching as these unelected white people were in office and nobody was doing a damn thing about it. You talk about the fall of democracy, this country's never had it, certainly never where black people are concerned. So they're going to have to learn to put black people's concerns first before we even look in their direction. Their goal is not to stop the right wing's rampage. It's merely to shore up and protect their own position. Well, that's not our goal. Our goal is justice and empowerment. And as for these little white media organizations like the AP, who have decided that they would use their position to attack ours, far as I'm concerned, the only thing the Associated Press is all the lies that are fit to print. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Joseph Shorter, Elisa Boutte, Mark Jefferson, Morris Bodden, and Jimmy Whitfield. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.